Some of you don't even recognize yourself anymore. Fear has changed you. You used to move with confidence, you used to believe, you used to feel steady, but somewhere along the way, you started sinking, not because you weren't trying either, not because you stopped caring, but because for one moment, you took your eyes off of the only thing that was holding you up.
The eternal word, a light unto the ages, now revealed.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Bible Told with Pastor Rod. If this is your first time here, do me a favor, make sure you like this video because other people need to see this video, and make sure you share it to a family member or a friend, and then subscribe and become a part of our family. You know what's scary? What's scary is that how fast fear can take over somebody's life. And not all at one time, not like some sort of dramatic movie where everything suddenly falls apart overnight. Most of the time, it happens quietly. It happens slowly. You don't even realize it's happening to you at first. One day, you're confident, you're focused, you're moving forward. You finally feel things are getting better for you. You start to trust again. You start to heal. Start maybe believing that, you know what, I'm going to be okay after all. And then all of a sudden, something happens. Maybe it's pressure. Maybe it's disappointment. Maybe life hits harder than you expected. Maybe the storm around you gets louder than the peace inside of you. And before you realize what's happening, your mind starts changing. You begin to overthink. The anxiety creeps in. Fear starts whispering things that sound real. Suddenly, you're questioning yourself. You're questioning your future. You're questioning whether you can really handle what's in front of you. And the craziest part is this. Sometimes the situation didn't even change. You changed. Your focus changed, because fear has a way of pulling your eyes away from what was holding you together in the first place. And once that happened, people start sinking emotionally before they realize it spiritually. Now, you can put on a smile in front of your best friends, in front of everybody, and still feel yourself drowning on the inside. Somebody done been there. You can keep showing up to work. You can keep answering the text messages. You can keep posting online, keep pretending everything is normal, while internally you feel like you are collapsing under your own weight, under your own thoughts. And maybe that's where some of you are right now. Come on, you're tired, not physically, but emotionally. Ladies, you want to pull your hair out. Fellas, you want to punch a wall. You're tired of trying to stay strong. You're tired of fighting thoughts nobody else can hear. You're tired of acting like you're okay when deep inside you feel the pressure building inside of you every single day. And some people around you think you're doing fine, but boy, if they only knew how hard you've been fighting just to keep yourself together. And that's why this story matters. Because there was a man named Peter, a man who experienced something impossible. For one moment, he was doing what nobody else around him had the courage to do. He stepped out into something bigger than fear, bigger than logic, bigger than what made sense. And for one moment, he was fine until he looked down.
It was late, the kind of late where the world starts feeling different. The sky had gone dark over the Sea of Galilee, and the wind that had once barely touched the water now moved across it with force. The waves were beginning to rise. The boat cracked beneath the pressure of the storm as the disciples fought to hold it together. These were fishermen, men who knew the water, men who had spent their lives on boats like this. But that night felt different. Something about this storm carried a kind of fear you could feel in your chest. And the deeper the night grew, the worse the storm became. The waves crashed harder against the sides of the boat. Water spilled onto the deck. The wind screamed across the sea, swallowing their voices as the men struggled to keep control. You can imagine the panic. The panic had started to spread. The time it slowly moves across people's faces when they realize they may not be able to fix what's happening. And somewhere in the middle of all of that chaos, Jesus wasn't in the boat. That's important, because sometimes fear gets louder when you feel alone. The disciples had already seen miracles. They had already watched Jesus do things that nobody could explain. But fear has a way of making people forget what they already know. And that's what storms do sometimes. They don't just attack your situation. They attack your focus. They make you feel abandoned, vulnerable, exposed, like maybe this time things really are falling apart. And then, through the darkness, they saw something. At first, it didn't even look human. Just a figure moving across the water while the storm raged around them, walking, steady, unshaken. While everything around them was falling apart, this figure kept moving toward them through the middle of the chaos. And the men in the boat were terrified, not comforted, terrified. Because sometimes when fear already has control of your mind, even hope looks frightening at first. Some of them thought they were seeing a ghost. Others froze completely. Nobody understood what they were looking at. The storm was already overwhelming enough. And now this? The wind still roaring, the waves still crashing, lightning tearing through the sky. And in the middle of all of it, Jesus walked toward them on the water, not fighting the storm, walking through it. For a moment, nobody moved. The storm was still raging. The boat was still shaking beneath them, wind tearing through the night, water crashing over the sides, and yet somehow, all of that started fading into the background compared to what they were looking at. Because there, in the middle of the sea, stood Jesus. Not sinking, not struggling, not overwhelmed, walking through the very thing that was terrifying everybody else. And you have to understand how impossible this moment felt. These men had spent their lives around water. They understood storms. They understood waves. They understood what happens when human beings step into deep water in the middle of the night. People drown. That's what made this moment so overwhelming. Because Jesus wasn't moving like someone afraid of the storm. He moved with complete authority over it. Every wave that threatened the boat sat beneath his feet. Every gust of wind that filled the disciples with panic didn't move him at all. And somewhere in the middle of all that fear, Peter locked eyes with him. That matters, because while everybody else saw danger, Peter saw something else. Hope. For the first time since the storm began, something inside him pulled harder than his fear did. And maybe that's what faith really is sometimes. Not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more. And then Peter said something crazy, something nobody else in that boat would have dared to say. "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you on the water." Can you imagine that moment? The others probably looked at him like he lost his mind. The storm was still violent. The sea was still dangerous. Nothing about the situation had changed, and yet Peter was now asking to step directly into the thing everybody else was trying to survive. But that's what happens when faith starts rising inside somebody. Comfort becomes smaller than calling. And for a second, everything went quiet inside Peter's mind, waiting for the answer. Then Jesus spoke one word, "Come." That was it. No long explanation, no guarantee about the storm, no promise that the waves would stop. Just one word, "Come." And somehow, that one word became stronger than the fear. You have to picture this moment slowly, because Peter didn't jump. He didn't move without thinking. He wasn't some fearless man with no doubt in him. The storm was still violent. The wind was still screaming across the sea. The boat beneath him was still rocking hard enough to throw a man overboard. Everything around him was still dangerous. But there was something about the voice of Jesus that pulled stronger than the fear. And Peter stood there, holding the edge of that boat, staring out into waves no human being should have been able to walk on. Every instinct in his body must have been telling him to stay where it was safe, stay where it made sense, stay where everybody else was staying, because boats feel safer than water, even broken boats. And isn't that how people live sometimes, holding on to things that are already falling apart, simply because they're familiar? But Peter kept looking at Jesus, not the waves, not the storm, Jesus. And little by little, his fear started losing its grip. Then finally, Peter moved. One foot climbed over the side of the boat, then the other. And for one impossible moment, Peter stood on top of the water. Can you imagine what that felt like? The waves still moving beneath him, wind hitting his face, rain falling around him. Everything that should have pulled him under, somehow holding him up instead. Not because Peter suddenly became powerful, but because his focus was stronger than his fear. And slowly, Peter started walking, not swimming, not sinking, walking step after step through the middle of a storm that should have destroyed him. And for a moment, he was doing the impossible. The other disciples probably couldn't even process what they were seeing. A fisherman walking on water in the middle of the night while lightning split the sky around him. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this moment made sense. But faith rarely makes sense while you're standing inside it. And honestly, this may have been the freest Peter had ever felt in his entire life. Because for the first time, fear wasn't controlling him anymore.
You know what's crazy? Peter was actually doing it. I want y'all to think about this for a second. The storm was still raging. The wind was still violent. The waves were still crashing against the boat, right? Nothing around him had changed, but Peter changed. Out of everybody sitting there frozen with fear, Peter was the only one willing to move, the only one willing to trust something bigger than what made sense. Everybody else, they stayed inside the boat trying to survive the storm. But Peter was the only one who stepped into it. And somehow he was walking on water. Now, can you imagine that moment? Can you imagine what it must have felt like for Peter? For the first time in his life, Peter was no longer controlled by fear. Every step took must have been like, whoa, this is impossible, but I'm doing it. The wind hitting his face, the rain smacking him in the face, the waves moving beneath his feet. I can only imagine the other disciples watching in complete shock while Peter, he kept walking toward Jesus through all of the chaos. And to be honest, that's how some of you felt when you first started healing, when you first started believing again. When you first started to trust God again, when you first started fighting for your peace again, you remember that feeling. Things weren't perfect, but you were moving. You were finally becoming stronger than the fear that used to control you, stronger than the anxiety, stronger than the voices in your head telling you, stay stuck where it feels safe. Nope. And maybe for the first time in a long time, you actually felt alive again. But here's the dangerous part about fear, y'all. Sometimes fear doesn't attack you before you move. Sometimes it waits until you're already walking. It waits until you finally start making progress. Until you finally step into something better. Until you finally start becoming the person you prayed to become. This is when fear begins to know something. It knows the storm around you isn't always the real danger. Sometimes the real danger is what happens inside your mind while you're in the middle of it. And that's where Peter is right now. I want y'all to think about this. He ain't sinking yet. No. He's not drowning yet. Peter's still walking. He's walking on the water. But the storm is still there. The wind is still screaming. And little by little, Peter is about to learn how fast fear can pull somebody's focus away from the very thing that was holding them up.
And for a moment, Peter forgot about the storm. That's important, because while his eyes stayed on Jesus, the waves didn't matter, the wind didn't matter, the darkness didn't matter. The thing that should have destroyed him somehow lost its power the moment his focus was fixed on something greater. But then, it happened. Maybe a wave crashed higher than the others. Maybe the wind hit harder against his body. Maybe thunder shook the sky loud enough to pull his attention away for one split second. Whatever it was, Peter looked down, and the moment he did, everything changed. Suddenly he noticed how violent the storm really was. The waves beneath his feet no longer looked small. The wind no longer sounded distant. Fear rushed back into his mind all at once, and the same water he had been walking on moments earlier now looked impossible again. That's how fear works. It changes what you see. A few seconds earlier, Peter was living inside a miracle. But the moment fear took control of his focus, the miracle started disappearing in front of him. His breathing probably changed first. His chest tightened. His thoughts started racing. Every step that felt effortless before suddenly felt unstable. And slowly, Peter started sinking. Can you imagine the panic? One second he's walking above the storm. The next he feels the water pulling him under. The disciples in the boat, watching in shock. Waves crashing around him. The freezing sea rising higher against his body with every second. Fear now completely overwhelming the faith that got him out there in the first place. And honestly, this is the part of the story people understand the most. Because a lot of people know what it feels like to start sinking mentally while everything around them gets louder. You were doing fine. Then anxiety got in your head. You were healing. Then fear started talking louder than your faith. You were moving forward. Then pressure made you look down. And now, it feels like the very thing you were walking through is pulling you under. Peter wasn't sinking because Jesus failed him. He was sinking because fear changed his focus. And somewhere in the middle of that storm, with water rising around him, Peter finally cried out the most honest prayer a drowning person can pray. Lord, save me.
Whoo, man, y'all know what the most terrifying part about this is? Peter didn't start sinking the moment he stepped out of the boat. He started sinking after he was already walking. And honestly, that's the part of this story that I don't think people understand the most. Because a lot of people, they know what it feels like to be doing good for a while. And then suddenly you feel yourselves slipping emotionally. Not because you stopped trying, not because you stopped believing, not because you wanted to give up, but because little by little, fear got louder than your focus. And maybe nobody around you noticed it at first. Maybe because from the outside, I mean, you still look normal. You still showed up. You smiled. You still answered people when they would, when they talked to you. You still posted online. You still tried to act like everything was absolutely fine. But inwardly, you was tired. Mentally, you was tired. You was fighting your thoughts that people could not see, carrying pressure nobody knew about, trying to stay strong while your mind slowly turned against you. And that's exactly what fear does. Fear changes what you see. A few moments earlier, Peter was literally walking through a miracle. The same waves that now all of a sudden now he starts to look around and now they terrify him. You see what I'm saying? These waves were already beneath his feet, but the storm the storm didn't get stronger. His focus changed. And some of you know exactly what that feels like. You were finally healing, man, until anxiety came back. You were finally moving forward until fear started whispering the worst case scenarios into your head again. You were finally finding peace until overthinking pulled you back into darkness. And now every day feels like a fight inside of your own mind. That's why this story hurts so deeply. Let me tell you something. I know about this. I'm Peter. You have these moments where you're doing so good, and then all of a sudden you start to get in your head. You see, Peter wasn't a weak man. Peter wasn't weak here. He's human. We're human. And as human beings, we can only stare at storms for so long before fear starts to set inside, especially when life get real loud, especially when the pressure starts to just getting heavier and heavier, especially when disappointment keeps happening time after time after time after time, especially when it feels like your prayers are being delayed, especially when you're trying so hard to keep yourself together emotionally, but internally, you feel I'm tired. I'm tired. You just want to scream. And maybe that's where some of you are right now. You're tired. I get it. Not physically. Emotionally, you just tired. You've been carrying all this pressure for so long, and your mind don't even know how to rest anymore. Fear just feel like it's taking control of you, even in silence. Even during the moments that are supposed to make you happy, you try, but it just seems like you just cannot ease up. You can't stop thinking. The dangerous part about fear is this, y'all. The longer you sit there and stare at the storm, the more impossible everything starts to feel. That's what happened to Peter. The waves became bigger in his mind than the voice that was calling to him in the first place. And isn't that what fear does to all of us eventually? It makes us forget how far we've already came. It makes us forget all of the progress we've made. It makes us forget the prayers God has already answered, the healing that has already started. Fear has a way of shrinking your faith until you can watch this, until you can see it. All you can see is the storm around you. And that's when people start sinking emotionally. Not all at once. It's slowly. It's quietly, it's internally, until one day you realize, man, I don't feel like myself anymore. But here's the beautiful part of this story. Peter may have lost focus, but Jesus never lost sight of Peter. And some of you need to hear that today. Just because your mind has been struggling doesn't mean God has abandoned you. Just because fear got louder doesn't mean he stopped reaching for you. Just because you feel like you're sinking emotionally right now, it doesn't mean your story is over. Let's keep watching.
At that moment, Peter cried out. Jesus moved immediately. That matters, because Jesus didn't stand there watching Peter drown. He didn't wait for Peter to fix it himself first. He didn't say, figure it out on your own. The second Peter reached out through all of that fear, all of that panic, all of the sinking, Jesus reached back. Can you imagine that moment? The storm still raging around them, waves crashing against Peter's body, water pulling him lower by the second, fear completely overwhelming him, and then suddenly, a hand grabs him, strong, steady, certain, not struggling, not panicked, certain. And just like that, Peter stopped sinking. Not because the storm disappeared, not because the waves suddenly calmed down, but because Jesus was holding him now. That's powerful. Because a lot of people think the miracle is Peter walking on water, but honestly, maybe the greater miracle is what happened after he failed. After the fear, after the sinking, after the doubt, Jesus still reached for him. And I think that's the part people need to hear the most. Because some of you think your fear disqualified you. You think because you struggled, because you doubted, because you started sinking emotionally, somehow God stepped away from you. Like your anxiety ruined everything. Like your overthinking ruined everything. Like your breakdown ruined everything. But Peter's story says the opposite. Jesus didn't abandon Peter in the storm. He grabbed him in it. And while Peter stood there shaking, soaked by the sea, trying to catch his breath in the middle of all of that fear, Jesus asked him something that is still hitting people 1,000 years later. Why did you doubt? Not anger, not rejection, just truth. Because Peter was never sinking because the storm was too strong. He was sinking because fear became louder than trust. And slowly, Jesus pulled him back above the waves. And slowly, Jesus led Peter back toward the boat. Can you imagine the silence between them? Peter soaking wet, heart still racing, trying to process everything that just happened. One moment he was walking on the water, the next he was drowning in fear. And now, the same hand that pulled him out was leading him back through the middle of the storm. Step by step, wave after wave, Jesus never let go of him. And I think sometimes people forget that part. Peter still had to walk back through the storm. The wind was still there, the waves were still moving, the night was still dark. But something inside of Peter had changed now. Because once somebody experiences the kind of grace that meets them at their lowest moment, they never see failure the same way again. And that moment, they climbed back into the boat. The storm stopped. Just like that, the wind died. The sea settled. The chaos that had terrified everybody moments earlier suddenly became still. And for the first time all night, there was silence. Real silence. The kind of silence that only comes after something changes you forever. Nobody in that boat spoke at first. What do you say after witnessing something like that? These men had just watched Jesus walk through a storm, watched Peter step out on faith, watch fear pull him under, and watch Jesus pull him back up again. And somewhere in the middle of all that silence, the disciples finally understood something. This wasn't just a teacher. This wasn't just a man. The one standing in that boat with them had the authority over the very thing they feared the most. And honestly, that's what makes this story so powerful. Because Peter failed. He doubted. He sank. But the story didn't end there. And maybe that's the part somebody watching this needs to hear the most right now. Just because fear got in doesn't mean God let go.
You know what hurts the most about Peter's story? It's not the storm. It's not even the sinking. It's the fact that for one moment, he was actually free. I want y'all to think about that. For one impossible moment in the middle of the dark sea, Peter experienced what it felt like to rise above the very thing everybody else around him was terrified of. While everybody else had stayed frozen in fear inside the boat, Peter stepped out. He trusted, he moved, he walked on the water. The same waves that terrified everybody else were beneath his feet. And honestly, that's what makes this story hit so hard emotionally. I know you probably read this story and you probably just say, "Oh, Peter walked on the water," but you miss all of the gems that are here. Because a lot of people know what it feels like to have moments where they finally think, "Okay, I'm okay. Finally, I'm healing. Finally, moving forward. Finally, peace again. Finally started to believe maybe life was going to get better. Maybe the anxiety was easing up. Maybe the depression wasn't controlling you like it used to. Maybe you finally started trusting again after being hurt. Maybe you finally felt close to God again after feeling lost for so long." And then something happened. Man, the pressure hit, fear hit, disappointment hit, the overthinking came back, and suddenly you started doing what Peter did, looking down. How many times has that happened to you? How many times did you finally start making progress only for fear to pull your attention back to everything that could go wrong? How many times did anxiety convince you that you weren't gonna make it after all? How many nights have you laid awake inside your own thoughts, feeling, your mind just running, drowning under pressure that nobody else could see? Because that's the dangerous thing about fear. Fear doesn't always destroy you immediately. Sometimes it slowly changes your focus until eventually you stop seeing what was holding you up and you start only seeing the storm around you. And once that happens, people start sinking emotionally, quietly, internally. You try to smile, but you try to function, but it's not gonna help. Meanwhile, inside you feel like you're drowning. And maybe that's why Peter's story has survived for thousands of years, because Peter's story isn't really just about the water. It's about people. It's about every person who ever stepped into something difficult and started losing confidence halfway through. Every person who started strong and slowly allowed fear to take over their thoughts. Every person who feels exhausted from fighting your battles inside your own mind every single day. But here's the part that changes everything. Peter sank, and Jesus still grabbed him. Don't miss that, y'all. Jesus didn't wait for Peter to become perfect. He didn't wait for Peter to have stronger faith. He didn't stand there disappointed while Peter drowned. Peter, what are you doing? Get up, Peter. Peter. Nope. The moment Peter cried out, Lord, save me, Jesus reached down and grabbed him. And I think somebody watching this right now needs to hear that more than anything. Because some of you think fear has ruined everything. You think because you broke down, because you doubted, because the anxiety got the best of you, because you started sinking emotionally, God stepped away from you. But Peter's story proves the opposite. The same Jesus who called Peter out of the boat was still there when Peter started drowning. The same hand that called him forward was the same hand that pulled him back up. I want y'all to think about that. And maybe that's the real miracle of the story. Not that Peter walked on the water, but that even in his weakest moments, he wasn't abandoned. So if you feel like you've been sinking lately, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, I want you to listen to me. Just because fear got louder, don't mean God got further away. Fear is real, absolutely. The storms people go through are real. The pressure is real. The anxiety is real. Some nights really do feel heavy. Some seasons really can make you feel like you're drowning inside your own thoughts. And if we're gonna be honest, sometimes life be hitting hard enough to make even strong people start looking down. But Peter's story reminds us of something very powerful. Fear may have made him sink, but fear did not have the power to keep him there. I want you to think about that one. Because the moment Peter reached out, Jesus reached back. And maybe that's what some of you need to remember today. You are not abandoned because you struggled. You are not forgotten because you got overwhelmed. You are not too far gone because fear got into your head for a season. You see, the same God who called Peter out into the storm was still standing there while Peter started to drown. And maybe that's the beauty of this whole story. Peter thought the storm was the end, but the storm became the place where he discovered who was truly holding him the entire time. So, if you've been sinking lately, if fear has been louder than peace, if the anxiety has been stealing your focus, if life has been pulling your eyes downward, maybe it's time to start looking back up again. Because storms don't last forever. And I promise you, fear does not get the final word. And remember, when the world is still trying to figure things out, the Bible told it first.